Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dr. Denisha Keating Show. I'm super excited to have Beth here today. She's going to be talking to us about some self-care stuff, and we're going to be talking just back and forth to understand each other. One of the things that we'll keep in mind is that every guest that comes on, we are sitting at the kitchen table to listen to understand, and we're going to ask questions to try to understand the other person. We're not going to talk over each other or yell or scream, but really try to listen, which is really hard to do sometimes, particularly on topics that are just harder to talk about. And I think Beth has a lot of knowledge to bring on this. So I'm going to ask questions, and we're inviting you to be the fly on the wall to listen to see how we would navigate a conversation like this. So go ahead and take it away, Beth.
So what I just heard you say is that we're best friends and people are listening into us.
Yeah, absolutely. Pretty much. we're just at home talking at the kitchen table about a topic that might be misunderstood or easily. I mean, when we're at home, it can get harder to talk about and stay cool sometimes when the conversation is a little bit heavier. So let's go ahead and dig in and see what happens.
Yes. Okay. Right. So I'm a mother of 5, and my oldest is 23. My youngest is 11. I got married when I was 20 years old and did not know when I got married. And I'm just going to put this out here right now that I'm going to be talking about abuse, sexual abuse, and then all of the other kinds of abuses as well. But I did not know when I got married that my new husband had been a pornography addict since he was 12 years old. And I was married to him for 23 years. And in that time, on our wedding night, it was awful. He did his thing, rolled over, went to sleep. And then the next morning, I was trying to eat breakfast past the lump in my throat, wondering, what in the world have I done? And then on our honeymoon, he masturbated in front of me. A month after we were married, he raped me for the first time. And that continued to happen throughout our marriage. And so I'm going to talk about self-care coming from this angle of being abused and what that abuse did to me. It put me definitely into survival mode. And when I say survival mode, I'm talking about actually, I since was diagnosed with PTSD and then complex PTSD. I've done tons of work around those so that I no longer have triggers. But survival mode for me looked like brain fog, intrusive thoughts, lack of energy, feeling like I was constantly just slogging through a muddy swamp. Like I couldn't move very well. And along with all of that, it may be obvious and it may not be obvious, is the lack of being able to be present with my children. So I don't remember a lot about my children's childhoods, and that makes me very, very sad. But I want to just talk about self-care coming from that angle. If you have been abused, no matter what kind of abuse it is, we often lose sight of ourselves because we're told things. We're told we aren't good enough. We're told we're not enough. We're told we aren't pretty or we aren't beautiful, or if we looked like that, or if we lost this weight, or if we gained some weight, or if our breasts were bigger, or, whatever. We're told a variety of different things. And so we begin to lose sight of ourselves and who we are and who we were created to be, as well as we start to believe the things that we're told. And definitely been there, believing the things that I was told. So I lost sight of who I was. Not only was I a wife, but I was a mother, and I had a child die. And so I was dealing with grief, and I was dealing with the different abuses that were happening. And I lost complete sight of who Beth is. Who is Beth? I lost sight of that. Until one day, it was like this lightning bolt hit me and was like, if he's looked at pornography since 12 years old, this isn't my fault. This isn't my issue. And a weight dropped off of me. And that really was the start of my healing journey. But it had been well over 10 years that I had been in the marriage before that happened. And then one morning I woke up, rolled over, and I said, "Are you still looking at pornography?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Okay, you need to move out." And while he was moved out that first time, I read a book called The Speed of Trust by Stephen M.R. Covey. He's the son of Stephen Covey, who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he wrote this book, The Speed of Trust. And I read this book and I was like, oh my word, I've been telling my husband, I don't trust you. I don't trust you. I don't trust what you say. I don't trust what you do. I don't trust you. And if you don't trust your spouse, really, what kind of marriage do you have? If you don't trust them, it's really hard to love them. And so I began to learn about trusting myself and trusting other people, and how quickly trust can be broken down and how quickly trust can be built up. And that started my journey into self-care. As a Bible believer, I believe the words of Yeshua when he says, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, what does that mean? Because if I don't love myself, how can I love my neighbor? So I had to learn how to love myself so that I could love other people. And I believe that also translates to trust. If I don't trust myself, how can I trust other people? So I started doing self-care and doing things to build up trust in myself, which has served me quite well.
And that's definitely really heavy stuff. Thank you for sharing that. I know my head's going like a mile a minute with all of that, because I know so many people would say a lot of different things, and I'm sure you've heard it all. Um, so when it comes to the discovery of that, what were some of the self-care things you were able to do? How did you start building trust to trust yourself? Because that's a pretty heavy thing. And when someone, my assumption is that he was unwilling to change that. So how did you just start to say, okay, I just need to focus on like taking care of my heart right now? So how did you start that journey to just taking care of your heart?
Well, building trust, I started small. So,
Mm-hmm.
we often will tell ourselves something like, well, I'm not going to have any sugar today. But then something will
Right.
happen and we will eat sugar. And then we're like, I wasn't going to eat any sugar today. And we'll beat ourselves up.
Mm-hmm.
But if you tell yourself, if you start small, something like, I'm just going to get out of bed when my alarm goes off, or as soon as I wake up, I'm going to get out of bed. And you do it, you follow through with it, that starts to build trust with yourself. And so you can
Mm-hmm.
start really small, like my alarm gets up, when my alarm goes off, I'm getting up. And you
Mm-hmm.
do that the first morning, and then you do that the second morning, and then you do that the third morning, and you start to really build trust with yourself. And then you can build on that, like to the point where you can say, okay, I am not going to eat sugar anymore. And somebody could set a pile of your favorite candy right in front of you, and you would say, no, I said today I wasn't going to eat sugar. I'm not going to. And you trust yourself to not pick that up and start eating it. Because
Yeah.
often it becomes mindless. We just are like, oh, it's right in front of me. And we quit thinking about how I'm not going to do it. So we do it. But if you've
Mm.
built trust with yourself, it's easier to be like, nope, I said I'm not going to. Look at all these other things I've done in the past. I can trust myself to not do this.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to, because it's clearly that's an addiction that he had for something, we don't know what caused that, but you said something that I think a lot of us don't hear is that somebody else's addiction is not a reflection of you as a person. Now there might be someone who's listening who's like, well, okay, sugar, that's not a big deal. Like this addiction is like ruining, maybe it's a financial addiction, where it's like they're gambling or something else. I don't think people see how hard pornography hits people. I don't see that. I don't hear a lot of people talking about that, like how it can really destroy confidence in both sides. Like we see it happening where both sides can now be addicted to it, which I think is just like an increase in numbers on both sides.
Mhm.
But it does ruin and hurt relationships. So how do we get into that mindset of like, your addiction is not a reflection of my inability to be a spouse to you. What was that? Because I know so many women and men who have experienced this part of dealing with their spouse's addiction, and people saying, well, you're just not showing up in these ways for them. That's why they have the addiction. I'm sure you heard that. So how did you get out of that mentality? Because that, I think that has really hurt a lot of people, because there's going to be people who choose to stay and who choose to go. And that I think that depends on what it is happening. That's a deeper conversation, and that should be done with like a lot of therapy, willingness on both sides, all of that fun stuff. Like really that takes a lot for both sides. But when it comes to taking on like that it's my fault, like how can you walk someone through some maybe questions? Because just saying like, oh, don't just self-care, I'm sure that's not enough. But how did you walk through? I mean, it's helpful, but it's like that's not the root of what's happening. So how would you walk someone through understanding that that's not a reflection of their inability to be better or something like that?
So for myself, it came down to recognizing and understanding that we all have free will.
Mm.
And I have free will, he has free will, he can choose to do that. But just because he chose to look at pornography does not mean it's my fault. Because there's a little word I used in there, chose, which can be shifted to choice. It's his choice to look at pornography. And his choice does not have to have anything to do with me or what I'm doing or not doing or how I look or don't look. Does not matter how someone looks, does not matter how someone behaves, does not matter. None of that matters, because someone still can make the choice. The
Mm.
most beautiful woman in the world can be married to someone who's choosing to use pornography. It is someone's choice to use it. And recognizing that it was his choice and he was making that, and that doesn't actually reflect on me, it reflects on him,
Mm.
was very freeing for me. Now, I do want to say his choices, just like all of our choices, they ripple out, right? Our choices don't just affect ourselves. So by him choosing to use pornography, that rippled out to me and told me I wasn't worthy, I wasn't valuable, I wasn't beautiful, I wasn't, all these things. And while he may have said those things to me verbally, just the very act of him using pornography said them to me without him saying a word, because
Mm.
it caused me to question myself and my worth and my value, but then recognizing that it's his choice. Just like it's a sugar addict's choice to eat sugar, or a
Mm.
shopping addict's choice to go shopping, or my choice to say, you know what, I'm going to go out for lunch today.
Mm.
That choice will have ripple effects. Maybe it's financial, maybe it's that I run into someone I haven't saw for years, whatever, there's going to be some kind of effect from every choice that we make.
Mm.
And literally coming to the understanding that he has free will and he can make choices, and this is his choice, and it really has nothing to do with me.
Mm. I think though there's countless stories that I can remember of people saying like, um, just people who have been addicted to porn have just said like, yeah, I was shamed into to this sometimes too. Like there is those situations where men and women feel like that's the only outlet that they have, or that like things were going on in their relationship that they were like, well, I'm not being heard here, or I'm being shamed and guilted, I'm being bullied emotionally, both on both sides. And so they were just like, well, where do I get like that mental satisfaction? So they would go towards something like addiction to spending money, or addiction to porn, or addiction to eating. And so you do see sometimes there, like you were talking, like there is that ripple effect. So sometimes it is that these particular things are caused by how we feel internally on what's going on around us. And so you did say like, okay, he didn't tell me that I wasn't worthy at times, if I'm understanding that correct, but he did do this, which made me feel unworthy. So how would someone kind of like, how it doesn't always work, but was there moments where you brought that to him and saying like, hey, this is enough, like we need to stop this, and his response was no? Or what was that conversation like?
For sure. So in the sex addiction world, there is something called discovery. So it's where you discover, maybe you discover that you're using his phone because your phone has died, or you're going somewhere and you're getting the directions, and so you're using his phone and you discover something on his phone. Or maybe you discover him in the act, or no, maybe you use the computer and you discover something on the computer. So there's this term called discovery, where you discover something's been going on. There's also a term that's used a couple of different ways, called disclosure.
Mm-hmm.
And disclosure may be them actually coming to you and saying, hey, I have this problem. I've been looking at pornography for years, or I've been looking at pornography, I looked at it twice, or, whatever, where they disclose to you. There's also something called trickle disclosure, which is what I actually experienced. After we had been married for a couple of years, he came to me and said that he looked at pornography. And I was a dutiful little Christian wife, and I forgave him, and we prayed, and he cried tears, and I thought everything had been taken care of and life went on. Well, a couple more years, he came to me and told me again that he had been looking at pornography. And this continued to happen. So trickle disclosure. And I did come to a point that I was like, I told him, I said, this can't continue to happen. I'm seeing the effects of this on our children. I'm concerned about the effects of it on our children, because we have 2 boys and 3 girls, but I was more concerned about my boys. And this has got to stop. And he was very good at hiding. I never went looking for evidence. I never looked on his phone. I never looked at the computer, partly because I wasn't tech savvy enough to do any of that, and partly because it never crossed my mind to look for it. He is very, very tech savvy and very, very well able to hide things. And so I never looked for anything, but I would ask him questions. I would ask, are you looking at pornography? And he would look me straight in the eye and lie to me. I now know, years later, he was looking me straight in the eye and he was lying to me that no, he doesn't look at pornography. So yeah, I definitely questioned. I definitely was trickle disclosure. And even after discovery, sometimes the offending spouse will use trickle disclosure. They might come to you, or you might discover it and you say, okay, and they'll say, oh, that was one time. And you're like, one time? Okay. Well, then, as the conversations continue, something else will come out and you'll be like, but you said that was one time. Oh, no. Well, 2 times, that's it. But yet things will continue to surface. So trickle disclosure can look like a couple of different ways. But yeah.
So it's basically the person's admitting it just to get it off their chest, but not actually to change the behavior.
Yes.
That's really frustrating.
Yes.
And I mean, I need someone to hear this, because I think we all need to be reminded is that we all do have some sort of addiction to something. So we can't be like, oh, how dare he? Like, everybody has an addiction, but what changes somebody from an addict to a recovering addict is the will and their own ability to say, I don't want this to have a control over my life anymore. And we see that, like, if people have ever attended an AA for alcoholics, they will never say, I was an addict. They always say, I am an addict, because they need to keep it at the forefront of their head because of how easy it is to get back into an addiction. And that's where, a lot of the times, we have seen more of a dismissal towards like sexual addictions, where someone is like, people are like, oh, it's not like that, but we actually see scientifically how porn has impacted negatively the brain. Like, you guys could look it up. Like, I would encourage you to look up the statistics of what it does and how the brain actually deteriorates and it impacts. It makes people more angry, disassociated, and it also, we see this with social media, but it's so much worse with the porn stuff, because it actually does impact, like you said, relationships. There is a spiritual aspect to this as well. And that's what I think people forget, is that we're just like, well, it doesn't hurt anybody because I'm just watching it. And then I'm going to touch on this, but it also, in the industry, we know that pornography is actually hurting people who are involved in it. There's a very small population of people in pornography who actually like doing what they're doing, versus the majority are there because they've been sex trafficked or forced into this. So it's not harmless. It's very harmful, but it also leaves the spouse feeling completely shame and complete guilt, and it impacts an entire family unit. So I have to, like, I know a couple people who have been sex addicts, and it turns, sometimes when that porn is not enough, they go out to actually trying things with people. And we see that sometimes, and it impacts people more than I think we are willing to admit. It is a harder topic. I feel the heaviness of what this is, that what that should have, could have, and would have been back then. But it makes me sad because I can think of all the things that you probably heard at that time. Things like, well, you should have done this as a wife, you should have done that as a wife. Like, well, he wouldn't have that addiction if you were more of this or that. And it's just like, but he chose this addiction. And I think sometimes people are like, it's easy just to stop. But when you say, I have full control over it, and you're just admitting to admit and not to change, that tells me that addiction is very strong over somebody. And I don't know how. It is just, I don't think there's any advice I can even give to somebody in this situation because it's just hard, because everything is so different. There's a lot of factors. Like, okay, you said he was 12 years old when he started. That's such a young age. How old was he when you discovered this as an adult?
He would have been 23.
So 23, and that went on for, you said 10 years? So 33. So from 12 to 33. And then you were just like, okay, this is enough. And that, I think that's what people don't understand is, my husband says it really well. He says men desire respect, women desire love and affection. So for a woman, the way that you show her that you care for her is that you love her and honor her in these ways. And like, we actually see that for women who are the spouse of an addict on porn, is that they consider that cheating, versus a man's like, no, it's like, we didn't do anything physical. It's like, there's the emotional, like, we're very much like, you emotionally went somewhere else for something. And that can be really hard, versus like, men are like, I want respect from you and love from you in that way. Like, that's what is so different with men and women. But it is like, it makes me sad because I know there's someone and other people going to listen to this, and it's like, yep, they're right now with a boyfriend or their girlfriend or with their spouse. And you sit back and you're like, oh, this is really heavy and hard. So, we can't, neither of us can say, hey, leave. Like, that is your choice. You could also stay. We have seen people have successful marriages once the person was willing. Any addiction, it has to take both people willing to work on it, but both people willing to, like, it's going to feel weird, but like, expose all to the right people. And that person with the addiction to be like, okay, I'm an open book and I'm being honest. And the other person being like, I'm willing to work through this. That takes a lot to get there. So we can't say like, you should stay or leave. Like, get with people who can actually help, get accountability, put yourself in areas where people are actually going to keep you accountable. But for you, Beth, like, what it's so hard, because I just think of like the shame and guilt that, like, how does someone start working on just reminding themselves, like, this was not because I was not good enough? Because that's so different than just I'm worthy. It's like, where do I even start to rebuild my confidence? What advice would you give?
So if I may go back, and
Yeah, absolutely.
Scripture says that if a man even looks on a woman to lust after her, he's already committed adultery with her in his heart.
Hmm.
So pornography is a breaking of the marriage covenant,
Yes.
or a breaking of an exclusive relationship, boyfriend, girlfriend, that you're dating just that person. You're not dating any others at the same time. So for me, and actually even women I've worked with who are not believers, they see it as a breaking of their marriage covenant.
Yeah.
So Shane, I don't know if you're familiar with Brene Brown's work or not.
Some
I
other people may not be, so dig in.
Yep. So I love Brene Brown and the work that she's done around shame and vulnerability. And I had a lot of shame. If I'm married to someone who does these things, then what does that say about me? Like, how can I be a good person if I'm married to somebody who's doing this? And I'd also like to go back, before I get into that too much further, I'd also like to go back, and you mentioned the sex addict will often go outside of pornography looking for more excitement. They will do that, but also there is the great risk, and this happened in my home, that they will groom their own children.
Yeah.
I I don't know that he ever outright molested any of my children, but there was definitely grooming happening. So it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to go outside the home looking for that other excitement. They may stay
Yeah,
right there
just
in your
off the
own home.
screen. Yeah.
Yep.
They engage in other things besides what's on the phone.
Yep.
Can you
So
explain grooming real quick, just so if someone listening, what grooming is? Someone
yes,
might not know what that is.
yeah. So grooming is where someone is teaching, training, working towards being able to have a sexual relationship with a minor. In my home, he actually touched my oldest daughter. He didn't actually touch her private places, but he touched close to them to see what her reaction would be. So he was, just kind of, how is she going to respond if I do this? And that's also a way of getting them used to being touched really close to their private parts, so that they don't protest when that touch actually happens.
Yeah.
Um, is
So
that
grooming would start off small sometimes, and just some people will be like, "Well, it's all only touching." It's like, no, sometimes it's saying things, verbal things, to get them. That's kind of like, "Oh, you shouldn't say that to a kid," but then it's like they push the limit little by little because, like you said, they get used to it. So this is what we commonly see is like someone who's addicted, like they start to like, okay, what can I get away with little by little and get people used to my behavior so no one thinks that it's weird because I'm just that person,
right?
which is horrible. So now you can continue. You don't have to keep going into the details of what happened. Just,
Well,
yeah,
if
just
if I
anyone
could,
listening. Yeah,
if I could
absolutely.
just give an example of verbal grooming. So
Yeah.
my former spouse also did that to my oldest daughter, and I heard him, and I came unglued on him. He told her, "When you wear that, it makes me want to have sex with you." So
Wow.
talking about, they not only do they keep pushing the boundary with the child, but that was pushing a boundary with me to see what my reaction was going to be, because I heard him say this to her. It was right there in front of the entire family. So um yeah, it's
And
touch, verbal,
sometimes it's a little bit it's
less
not
blatant.
as yeah, sometimes it's just like, oh, you look really good, and it's like a man should not tell a little girl that, so just sometimes that's what it is. Sometimes it's just like there's just other ones. Look it up. We don't want to go too into detail because it can be hard for someone listening, but it, like you said, it's pushing the envelope little by little until it is that blatant, and then you're like, wow, that just happened, what do I even do, and you're too scared to move.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so back to Brene Brown. I love her work. She's a shame and vulnerability researcher, and I read her book, Daring Greatly and Rising Strong and Gifts of Imperfections, pretty early into my self-care journey, my recovery journey. And when I learned the difference between shame and guilt, shame says there is something wrong with me. Guilt says I've done something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I carried so much shame, again, because of, if I'm associated with him, married to him, what does that say about me?
Mm-hmm.
Because also I was told, well, this must be your fault because you won't have sex with him. So this has to be your fault. This has to be your problem.
Mm-hmm.
So then that means there's something wrong with me. Shame.
Yeah.
Well, her shame and vulnerability, when someone is in shame, if they are vulnerable and they will share that shame with someone who is safe, let me be
Mm-hmm.
very clear, please find safe people to share with. That is
Yeah.
self-care. That is a component of self-care.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
We preach that a
when,
lot.
when you are vulnerable, it helps other people feel that they are safe to open up and be vulnerable. So I
Mm-hmm.
discovered the more I was vulnerable with the right people, the more my shame dissipated and other people were able to share their shame and be vulnerable. And that is beautiful. So I like
Mm-hmm.
to say that vulnerability is the antidote to shame.
Mm-hmm. So, can I ask a question? Because I think this is what's popping through my head, and I think someone's going to ask this. You said vulnerability with the right people. So, it's going to be twofold. How have you found the right people? And how have you discovered the wrong person? And then I'll ask my secondary question after that, because this also ties into grooming.
Okay. So how did I find the right people?
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately for me, it was trial and error. I trusted the wrong
Yeah.
people. Um, and I was burnt and I learned. Brene uses Theodore Roosevelt's speech in France from 1901 or something like that. And he talks about the man in the arena. And when I had never heard of that until I saw it in her book, read it in her book, and I was like, oh, this is beautiful. It
Mm-hmm.
fits so well for any situation. So the man in the arena is find people who are in same or similar situations that you are in to share with. They're in your arena. They're fighting the same fight you're fighting. They are sweating blood. They're sweating. They're crying. There's blood. They're in the fight.
Mm-hmm.
They are safe people. If someone has no idea what you have been through and are facing because they've never faced it, they've never had any kind of sexual misconduct in their family or in their home, in their extended family, then they are not in your arena and they may not be safe. Not everybody that's not in your arena is not safe, but the majority are going to be because they have absolutely no understanding of what you have
Mm-hmm.
been through and have faced. So
Yeah.
find the people in your arena. That can look like 12-step groups. Like you mentioned, Alcoholics Anonymous. There is a 12-step group that has been adapted from Alcoholics Anonymous for sex addicts. So you can sanon.org.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can find a group
Yeah.
in your area on that website probably.
So I want to caution people though too, because I have seen the groomers often come at that. I wouldn't say they come at us, but those who have experienced abuse, it kind of feels like sometimes there's multiple times where we run into people who are just another abuser. So sometimes seeking people in the arena with us, we have to still be very cautious.
Mm-hmm.
I would say err on the side of caution if someone is like, tell me everything, you can trust me. And it's like, I've known you a
Oh
couple
yeah.
weeks.
Yeah.
like that's super red flag. Like if you get that pit in your stomach where you're like, something doesn't feel right. This feels too good to be like this easy to talk to people. I would be very cautious, because we have seen where there are predators lurking, and maybe they're not groomers in the sense of sexual groomers, but maybe they're emotional groomers. Maybe they like to trauma bond, and they just like to know your story, and then they start to use it, whatever agenda that they have. So we have to be very cautious when we do share our story. And I think that there's a difference between being vulnerable and transparent. Transparent is just saying here's all the details. Vulnerability is this is how I'm feeling about it. But finding someone in that arena where it's like, hey, I've been down this road. We've been down this road before. And it's not like, usually I find the people who are more vulnerable where it's like, it's going to be hell. It's going to suck. And it's a lot of trial and error. Those are the people who are safer versus the one who's like, just do what I say and it'll be fine. Like we see that story where a lot of the times, in our ability, as especially with women, like trying to be vulnerable, we often get close with someone and they tend to be really bad. And it is trial and error. Unfortunately, you can't read a person, but be very cautious. Like same with dating. It's like if they're speed relationships, like if they're speed dating you as a friend, be cautious, and be okay with being like, no, I'm not going to share that information with you no matter how much you push. If they're very pushy, I find that those are the wrong people. And it usually is just like, you can tell me whatever, whenever you want. You can, I'm here for you. And it's just like, okay, you just said that like 10 minutes ago. Like, I don't need to tell you. Like, you really should tell me because I'm going to be the best person to walk you through because I've been through it. That's where I get very, like there's just this gut feeling I get that I'm like, something doesn't feel right about this person. Like the person who's forcing you to share. Maybe they're like, well, you went through this, you should share over here. Be cautious because it's like, you don't have to share what you don't want to share. And you shouldn't be ashamed of sharing, but you should do it with caution. Because I think that's something I do a lot of advocacy work for foster care. And the biggest thing is so many people want to know what abuse happened. And that's not for them to know. But it is something that can be very easy to just blurt out. And then people are like, well, what exactly happened? And it's those people that I'm always like, something's not right here. So, really, and ask questions, like ask someone you trust, like, hey, what vibe do you get from this person? How do you read this person? And they might be like, hey, that person's like over jealous and like, I don't like it. And like, I don't know, they rub me the wrong way. Listen to those people because they're not just saying it to say it. Honestly, they're saying it because they're just like, I don't know what it is, but it's something. And that I find when someone has said that, they've always been accurate, that something was off. When they're just like, I can't put my finger on it because people are good at hiding. Manipulators are good at hiding. So just, be cautious. Is there anything else you would like to add before we end?
Well, I would just like to say thank you for that distinction because I had someone sit me down and be like, so tell me why you're separated for the second time. And when you said that, I was like,
It's none of your business. And it starts off like, you can trust me. I'm just curious what happened. And I actually had to be cautious of that too, because I did that to somebody else. And I was like, whoa, hold on, wait, like, you don't have to share anything with me, which is why, like, when you started sharing, I was like, hey, you don't actually, if you don't want to, you don't have to go down that route. Because it's so important that someone shares that with us to say, I'm not forcing you to be vulnerable with me. Like, if you want to share whatever you want to share it. But just know, like, you can say, I'm not comfortable. And I'm like, I got you. I'm not going to be like, well, you can trust me. Like, no, like we don't play games. We don't play games.
Right.
It's so hard. Yeah. I'm so sorry that happened to you. I'd be so mad. I'd throw a fist or so. Just one or two, just maybe a couple. Cause when that person sat you down, cause I think someone needs to hear this. When that person sat you down and said, well, tell me why you're leaving. What did you feel when they asked that question? What went through your head?
I wasn't far enough into my healing to recognize it as a red flag.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, here's someone that truly cares. It was someone that I've known for years. I trusted them. And I learned that they did not actually have my best interest at heart. And I learned it the
Mm.
hard way,
Mm.
because they went on to tell me, um, one of those things that you mentioned earlier, they went on to tell me, well, it's just pornography. At least he didn't go out and have an affair. And I'm like, but hold on a minute. It's not just pornography. Like, you have no idea what it's done to my home.
Mm.
And it was in the same family that someone else said to me, but Beth, he does all this stuff for fellowship, and he dances, and he does all the audio, and he teaches so well. And I'm like, yeah, that's what he wants you to see. You don't know what goes on behind closed doors at home.
You can't erase a bad habit or a sin with good works.
No.
Like, let's just say that. Like, y'all, it doesn't matter what they do out in public. If they're at home doing crap, it doesn't mean anything. That voids everything. Just because you do good doesn't mean you are a good person. Like, who you are in the heart and the core is what makes you a good person, not how you look to other people.
Right.
And that's actually how groomers hide so well, is that so many people have said that, like, but they're so good at blah, 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 they do all this stuff for the community. And it's like, but you said it, you don't see what they do at home. You don't see what's happening behind closed doors. It's not just this. If it was just that, this would be fixed. That's not what's happening. It's so much more than that. Oh, that's
Yeah.
so, throw some fists.
Yeah. So you ask for some last thoughts. And
Yeah.
self-care. Back to the topic of self-care.
Mm-hmm.
Finding safe people is self-care. And the world teaches us that self-care is getting your nails done, eating chocolates, taking a bubble bath, and
Mm-hmm.
all these, getting our hair done. This is self-care. I disagree with that.
That's just normal care. A shower is just normal care.
Yes.
Continue.
Yes.
I love that you brought that up, actually.
Self-care is actually being willing to be introspective, to go within and do the work to heal from whatever
Mm.
abuse you have been subjected to. And that means journaling. That means learning to like yourself and being able to spend time with just yourself without a movie or music or a podcast where you can just sit in silence with just yourself.
Mm.
Healing, self-care, being healing is learning to say no. It's learning to listen to your body and knowing that, oh, this is happening. I need to drink some water, or I need to eat a meal and not just be eating this bag of chips, or, oh, I need to just go sit down and rest
Mm.
and not be doing anything. So true self-care is doing things that bring healing to you, heart, mind, and soul.
Mm. I think that's beautiful. That's a great way to look at it. So, care, showers, sleep, food, self care, healing to soul, body, mind, spirit, joy, whatever that looks like, whatever it helps to really heal that inner pain that's been happening. I love that. Anything else you'd like to share?
Well, I would like to just say, when you do the work to heal, remember those ripples? It ripples out.
Mm.
If you have children, it's going to
Yeah.
ripple to your children. If you don't have children, it's still going to ripple out to your family and your friends. So practice true self-care.
So I love that you said earlier too, you were like the damage was rippling out, but the healing ripples out too. That's such a beautiful, you need to write a book of like healing can ripple out the damage. That's your book. You take it or not. Like
I like
I
that title. And I,
yeah.
I actually have a book in process.
Maybe,
But
maybe put a chapter in it. I don't know. But I think you need to touch in on that subject within that, because I love that you're writing it down. You're like, actually, this is
I'm writing
this,
it
because
down.
it's something that I don't think we think of often. And as you know, as we're wrapping up, you guys, we do know what the damage does. We see the generational curses that can happen in our life or damage that can happen in our life. But oftentimes what we forget is that healing can also ripple down, not just to the next generation, but those around us. We do see healing can happen to make us whole, but it also, like Beth was saying, it ripples out to everyone around us. When people see that we can find healing, they start to find healing too. And I think that's a beautiful picture of healing can ripple over the broken, and take out the broken. So that's a beautiful thing. You guys, thank you for joining. If you guys have questions, I would love for you guys to reach out to Beth. Please don't feel any shame or guilt in this. Addiction is hard. It is just a hard beast. It's an ugly beast. We see it killing so much inside families and friends and communities. It's not just that person. So if you do say the phrase of it's only hurting me, it's not hurting anybody else, I would actually ask you to relook at that, because we have seen that that statement is not true. So you guys can connect with Beth. I'm going to have some links of hers down below, and you guys can make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for all episodes. And we will continue on this journey of listening at the kitchen table. Thank you guys for joining. Have a great day.